the screen, I think. I decided to choose this topic because it's very timely. The topic is, to what extent should a person endanger themselves in order to save another person? And this, of course, became a live issue once again during the, as we say in Israel, the Corona crisis, or in Chutz La'aretz, the COVID-19 crisis, where doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals were putting themselves in danger, especially at the beginning of the epidemic when nobody knew exactly what they were doing, including the poor doctor in Wuhan in China, who discovered the virus and died about 5 or 6 weeks later. And therefore, I decided to re-examine this question, which I had originally taught 19 years ago at a Yom Iyun, at an Erev Iyun in memory of Dr. Barbara Wax, Zichronah Livracha, which is an annual event we have here in Jerusalem, sponsored by Dr. Saul Wax, who's Barbara was Saul's wife. And Barbara died in August of 1997 while trying to save a child from drowning on a tiyul in northern Israel, near the Banyas, the Don River. And we frequently think that the new problems we face are new. But if you study Talmud and you study the responsa literature, you usually find that there is nothing new under the sun. Ein chadash tachat hashamesh. What we consider a new dilemma has been discussed for the past 2,000 years in the Talmud and in rabbinic literature. Throughout Jewish and general history, these cases have arisen where a person has to decide, usually in a very short amount of time, whether he or she are going to risk their lives in order to save another person or other people. Other examples include this month we're celebrating the 100th yahrzeit of Professor Israel Friedlander, who was a professor of Bible at JTS. He traveled to the Ukraine with a mishlachat, with a mission of the Joint Distribution Committee to bring money and food to the Jews of Ukraine. And there he was murdered. His place of burial was only rediscovered 80 years later. And I had the honor of speaking at his funeral in Jerusalem 19 years ago, where he was reburied. And another example is coming up soon in the next few weeks. The 4th of July, which we all know what the 4th of July is, but the 4th of July is also the yahrzeit of Yoni Netanyahu. And Yoni Netanyahu and the Israeli soldiers who flew to Uganda, there was a good chance that not only one soldier would be killed, but that many of the soldiers would be killed in order to save the Jews and the non-Jews taken captive by Idi Amin. Were they required to do that? Were they allowed to do that? Was it an act of bravery? Was it an act of foolishness? So these are the types of questions that have been asked throughout Jewish history, and I'll just give one more very interesting example, which was in the Israeli press in 2012, 8 years ago. A young Israeli who had recently finished the army, his name is Nadav Ben Yehuda. He was on his way up Mount Everest, and he was a few hundred meters from the top of Mount Everest. He was in very good physical shape. And he saw a friend of his lying in the snow who was on the way down. And you probably know that on Mount Everest every year, 5 or 10 or 20 people die near the summit due to lack of oxygen. And he had to decide in a split second, even though his mind was very foggy due to lack of oxygen, he had to decide in a split second, is he going to go up to the top of Mount Everest, which was his life's dream, or is he going to try to save his friend? He abandoned his dream. He put his friend on his back, and he climbed down Mount Everest for 8 hours with his friend on his back, and he saved his friend's life. But there was a very good chance that he could have died in the process. So we see from all of these examples that there are really 3 types of situations where the question of sakana atzmit, of endangering yourself to save others for the sake of Pikuah Nefesh come into play. The first example are the ones given in the Talmud that we'll see in a moment, which is to save your friend from a dangerous animal, from a river, or from robbers, or in an emergency medical situation. The second example, which has been debated fiercely during the past 30 or 40 years, is the example of the kidney transplant. If you donate one of your kidneys to a relative or friend, you are not in immediate danger of death, but you are certainly increasing your own chances of illness and a less healthy life than you might have had before. Is it permissible to do this? Is it forbidden to do this? Or is it a mitzvah to do this? And finally, in cases of war, where soldiers frequently endanger their lives to save their fellow soldiers, and there are hundreds of examples in the history of Israel's wars with our neighbors. Is this a praiseworthy act? Is it a foolish act? Is it a midat chasidut? Is it something you do as an act of piety, but it shouldn't be expected of everyone? And so on and so forth. So these are the types of situations which arise frequently, which have arisen frequently throughout Jewish history. And we're now going to look at what the 5 basic Talmudic sources have to say on the subject. And given whatever time we have, we will examine various responsa that have been written throughout the generations and halachic discussions of these topics. And we will see, I'm already going to give you a spoiler, we will see that there is no one correct or agreed upon answer to this question. And you can basically, if you look at the responsa about kidney transplants, you can basically divide the poskim, the halachic authorities, into 3 camps. There are those who think that it's a mitzvah to donate a kidney. There are those who think that it's forbidden to donate a kidney. And there are those who think that you're not required to donate a kidney, but if you do so, it's a midat chasidut, it's an act of piety. So before we jump ahead to the kidney, let's jump back to the Talmudic sources. I'm going to share the screen now. And basically, there are 5 Talmudic sources that most rabbis who have discussed this topic have quoted. And there in front of you, I put the Talmudic text in Hebrew and Aramaic, followed by an English translation, which I took from the Ross. The Ross is Rabbi Sansino, the famous, he wasn't really a rabbi, it's the name of a printing company, the famous Sansino Talmud of the 1930s, 100 years ago, which in my opinion is still the best English translation of the Babylonian Talmud. And I don't ever look at the English, but for those of you who want to look at it, please do so. I'm going to translate the text directly from the Hebrew and Aramaic, but the English will obviously help those who do not have good eyes or who are not fluent in Aramaic. So the first famous passage is found in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, folio 73a, Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. They're discussing a passage that they had quoted previously, which is why it says gufa. Gufa means let's go back and examine a passage we had already quoted. Minayin laroet chavero shu tovea banahar. How do we know that if you see your friend who is drowning in a river, o chaya gorarto, or a wild animal is dragging your friend, o listim ba'in alav, or robbers are pouncing upon your friend, shuhu chayav la'atzilo. In other words, it doesn't ask the question, are you required to save your friend? It simply says, what is the biblical basis for the fact that you must save your friend? So the person asking the question assumes that you must save your friend. He's looking for a biblical proof text to prove this. Talmud Lomar, for we have learned, Vayikra chapter 19, verse 16, Lo ta'amod adam re'echa, do not stand idly by the blood of your brother, which is a very famous verse. We all know it from the Parsha of Kedoshim. Do not stand idly by the blood of your brother. You see him, that he's in a very dangerous situation. Jump in and save him. So the Gemara, as usual, always has another opinion. Veha mehacha nafka. And do we learn it really from this verse? Mehatam nafka. No, we learn it from another verse. Another rabbinic passage, which is found in Bava Kama. Avedat gufo minayin. How do you know that you must return a person's body to him? Which is an interesting concept. We all know of the concept of hashavat avedah, that you must return your friend's property. But how do you know that you must return your friend's body to him? You must restore his body to him. Talmud lomar v'hashevoto lo, which is a verse found in Dvarim, chapter 22, verse 2. And there, of course, it's talking about restoring property. But this passage that they're quoting here, which also appears in the tractate of Bava Kama, says, how do you know that you must restore a person's body? Because the verse says, and you shall restore it to him. And they take restore it to him to include restoring the person's body to him. As Rashi says, kra yeterahu, there's an extra verbiage there, extra words there in the passage in the Bible. Lemidrash, hashev et gufo la'atzmo, return his body to himself. So they say, why do we need to learn this idea of saving your friend from Leviticus chapter 19? We've already learned it from Deuteronomy chapter 22. So why do we need two verses? Is there something we find in one verse that we don't find in the other? And the Gemara replies, I mehatam hava amina hanemile benafshe. If we only learned it from Deuteronomy chapter 22, we would say that it only means that you must save your friend from danger. Ava mitrach umegar agore emalo, but to take the trouble of hiring others to save your friend, perhaps not. Kamash malan, the second verse from Leviticus teaches us that you must also pay for others to save your friend. So let's take a modern situation. You hear that a friend of yours has been captured by drug lords in Colombia or some other country in South America. Okay, so you're not going to get on a plane and go save your friend because A, you don't know how to save your friend. You're not a paramilitary expert. And B, you might get there too late or all sorts of other reasons. But you should pay for a mishlachat, for a group of rescuers to go and rescue your friend. Or the same thing if your friend is lost in the desert, or if he's lost at sea, and so on and so forth. So the Talmudic passage here is using these two verses, juxtaposing the two verses, to say, number one, you must rescue your friend from the wild animal, from the river, or from the robbers. Number two, if you can't do it yourself, you must pay others to do it. Okay? Are there any questions or comments about this passage in the Talmud? I should probably stop sharing screen so I can see you. Does anybody have a question or comment about the first passage in the Talmud?
Yes, I have a question. I had to unmute myself. Okay. My question is the obligation to hire other people to do it, if you yourself can't. Is this where the idea came for ransoming through the centuries in various circumstances in various countries where authorities would take Jewish prominent people, usually prisoner, and then hold them for ransom? Is this where the source for?
Not exactly, because this is obviously an important source, but the concept you're discussing is pidyon shvuyim, the redemption of captives.
Right.
And the redemption of captives is discussed in the tractate of Baba Batra, folio 10b, and other places in the Talmud. It says there, one passage says that pidyon shvuyim, the redemption of captives, is considered one of the highest mitzvot, more important than any other mitzvah. And indeed, I have discussed the redemption of captives in a responsum a number of years ago when Israel was discussing exchanging terrorists for Israeli soldiers, which, as you know, is a constant dilemma in the city. So there's a whole set of sources in the Talmud about Pidyon Shvi'in, about the redemptive of captives, but there it's usually a question of paying money in order to redeem the captive. In this case, you're not actually paying money to redeem a captive. You're paying money to send out a rescue party to find the person who was kidnapped, or to find the person who was dragged away by a lion or by a river, et cetera, et cetera. So it's slightly different, but in general, it's the same idea.
So it's okay to endanger someone else if you're paying them.
Well, you're paying an expert, and you're paying people who are used to this type of work. You know, if somebody's taken away by the Colorado River, you know, you could easily jump in and try and save them, but you'll die immediately. But if you send out a rescue party of people who are trained to do that, there's a good chance they may succeed, or they'll have a much better chance of succeeding than you do.
I have another question.
Yes.
Talking about somebody who is extremely observant and is with a friend on a Shabbat, and the friend is taken ill. Does he call an ambulance?
Okay, well, that's an entire set of sources about Pikuah Nefesh, which is a classic topic in Jewish law. The most important passage is found in the tractate of Yoma, folio 84a, I believe, where it talks about rescuing somebody and doing a Pikuah Nefesh. It's also discussed in the tractate of Shabbat. It's also found in the laws of Shabbat and the laws of Yom Kippur in the Shulchan Aruch. Right there, if somebody is very ill or you think they're going to die, not only are you allowed to desecrate the Shabbat or Yom Kippur, you are required to desecrate the Shabbat or Yom Kippur. Yafeh sha'ah chat kodem, the faster the better, and the rabbi is supposed to do it himself. In other words, you don't send some schlepper to take the person to the hospital. The rabbi is supposed to do it himself to show everyone that Pikuach Nefesh doches Shabbat, that saving a human life sets aside Shabbat restrictions. But it's interesting that you raise these two other things. In other words, we have various concepts in Judaism about saving lives. We have Pikuach Nefesh, saving a life on Shabbat or Yom Kippur or on a Jewish holiday. We have Pidyon Shvuyim, paying money to redeem the captives. But here, you're involved with physical danger to the person doing the saving. And that is our topic today.
Can I offer a kind of commonplace modern example of hiring somebody who's better skilled so you don't risk your own life? Is the very common practice of hiring lifeguards at places where people swim. That's an expert. We hire them to ensure that somebody can safely save a life.
That's right, because frequently the person who dives in to save the person drowning ends up drowning themselves. Okay, so what did the poskim, what did the halachic authorities do with this passage? The most famous example is Maimonides, the Rambam. I did not Xerox that for you. I didn't put it on the screen, but whoever has access to the Rambam, it's in Hilchot Rotzeach Ushmirat HaNefesh, the laws of murder and saving a soul, chapter 1, footnote, I have no idea why that happened. Chapter 1, foot, halacha number 14. And the Rambam just takes the passage that we learned in Sanhedrin and he codifies it. He says, Kol hayachol latzil v'lo itzil, over lo tamod adam re'echa. Whoever could save a life and did not save has transgressed the verse in Leviticus, do not stand idly by the blood of your brother. In other words, he prefers that verse that we quoted and not the other one. And a person who sees his friend drowning in a river, or robbers pouncing upon him, or a vicious animal, a wild animal, and he can save him himself, or he can pay others to save his friend, and he did not. I'm skipping a little bit. V'chol kayotze b'dvarim ha'ele, and anything that is similar. Ha'oseh otam over alot ta'amod adam re'acha. A person who shirked his duty and did not save his friend himself or hire others to save his friend has transgressed the biblical commandment of lo ta'amod adam re'acha. You shall not stand idly by the blood of your brother. In other words, basically, the Rambam took this passage from Sanhedrin and codified it directly in his famous code of Jewish law. Now, I don't know who's playing around with the screen, but if you can return to the Talmudic sources, please. If not, I'll try and do it. Do you want to continue?
It's Yehudit's screen, it says.
Okay, well, I'm going to share this. We're now in source number 2. And source number 2, at first glance, seems to say the exact opposite of the first passage we just learned. But that's, of course, because we're Jewish, and this is the Talmud. The Talmud frequently contains contradictory passage on the same subject. And this is a very famous passage, which you might have learned in Hebrew school and not known where it came from. This is Bava Metzia, folio 62a, Samach Bet Amud Aleph. And it's a discussion of another verse in Vayikra, which is V'chei achicha imach, Vayikra kaf he lamed vav, Vayikra chapter 25, verse 36. And the subject there is not saving a life. The subject there is neshech v'tarbit, is taking interest or usury, which is also an important topic in the Torah and the Talmud. And it talks there, it uses the expression, and your brother shall live with you. And you'll notice I'm emphasizing the word with you, imach. I don't have to emphasize that word, but you'll see why I did in a moment. So the Talmud says, and this is before the sentence that I put in brackets, and in the English I started with that quote, Rabbi Yochanan, hai v'chei achicha imach, my Idly. Rabbi Yochanan, what did he do with the verse, and your brother shall live with you? What did he do with that verse? What was his midrash on that verse? Mi ba'ele lechidetanya. He needed that verse for the following teaching. And the following teaching is a braita. And a braita means a teaching of the Tanaim, which is from the 2nd century, roughly. It's at the same time as the Mishnah or the Tosefta, and there are thousands of braitot quoted in the Babylonian and Palestinian Talmuds. And this is a very famous braita, and it goes like this. Shnaim shayu malchim baderech. 2 people are walking on the road. It doesn't say where the road is, but given the description, apparently it's in the Negev or in the desert in a place with very little water. Ubiyad echad mehen kiton shomayim, and one of them has a vessel of water, and a kiton not only sounds like the word canteen, but also looks like a canteen. A kiton is a Greek word. It is a receptacle for holding water, and I should have showed you a picture, but the book's up there. Okay, so one of them is holding a kiton shomayim, a water canteen. Im shotim shnehem metim. If they both drink from the canteen, they will both die. In other words, there is not enough water in the kiton for both of them to reach civilization. V'im shoteh echad mehen magia leishuv. If one of them drinks the water, he will survive and he will reach a settlement. So what do you do? Darash ben Petora, and Ben Petora is not a famous Tana, but you'll see in a moment he's a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva, which means he's a Tana of the 3rd generation, which means he lived at the beginning of the 2nd century. Darash ben Petora, this was his halachic determination. Mutav sheishtu shnehem v'yamutu ve'al yireh echad mehem b'mitato shel chavero. Ben Petora said, it is better that they should both drink from the canteen and they should both die, and one of them should not see the death of his friend. In other words, better they should both drink from the canteen and die than one of them should drink from the canteen and he will live and his friend will die. This was Ben Petora's halachic determination, even though the word darash in modern Hebrew means to give a drasha, to give a sermon. Darash in the Babylonian Talmud frequently means to give a halachic ruling. As he said, this is what you're supposed to do. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva, v'limeid, until Rabbi Akiva came along and taught the verse, v'chei achicha imach, and your brother shall dwell with you, Leviticus 25:36. Chayecha kodmin lechaye chavercha. Your life takes precedence over the life of your friend. In other words, Rabbi Akiva comes to the exact opposite conclusion of Ben Petora. You'll notice that Ben Petora did not quote any verse. He was simply using logic. He said, better you should both die than one of you should live and watch your friend die. Rabbi Akiva says, no, we can learn from this verse, and your brother shall live with you, that first you have to live. He can't live with you if you are dead. So first you have to save your own life and drink from the canteen. And unfortunately, your friend will not live, but your first obligation is to save yourself. So let us swoop back to passage number 1. We said you're supposed to jump into the raging river and save your friend, or run after your friend who's been dragged off by a lion, or who's been dragged off by 10 highway robbers. But what about v'chei achicha imach? If your brother's supposed to live with you, you first have to protect your own life. And if you jump in the river, there's a good chance that you will die. So, is this a contradiction to Rabbi Akiva, or perhaps it's a different subject? So you could easily say that this is a contradiction, that the passage in Sanhedrin says you must endanger your life to save your friend, and Rabbi Akiva says, no, you must not. First, you must save yourself. Or you could say that these are two different cases, which is what some of the rabbis say. The first passage is safek sakana, is doubtful danger. In other words, you don't know when you jump in the river or you run after your friend who was dragged off for a lion, you don't know what percentage of a chance you have of returning alive. 50-50, 75-25, 25-75. But in the case of the desert, according to the outline laid out in the Braita, one of you or both of you are going to die. So in this case, Rabbi Akiva says you have to choose your life first, because this is not a safek sakana. This is not a doubtful danger. This is vadai sakana. This is a definite danger. So some rabbis say that the two passages in the Talmud are not discussing the exact same case, whereas other rabbis say, no, we have Sanhedrin versus Bava Metzia, and these are two different opinions on the subject of endangering yourself to save another person. And I just want to add one very interesting thing, which is that most of the famous codes of Jewish law did not codify this teaching of Rabbi Akiva. For those of you who are used to studying Talmud, you know that when the halacha follows a certain passage in the Talmud, there's a little Hebrew letter next to that sentence, which refers you to the footnotes on the side, Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah. In other words, it refers you to the Rambam or the Shulchan Aruch or the Tur, that the halacha follows so-and-so. You notice in this passage I just read you from Bava Metzia, there is no little footnote, because the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur do not codify this passage at all. In other words, they did not want to decide, apparently, and they didn't codify either Rabbi Akiva or Ben Petora. One of the medieval commentaries, the Meiri, a very famous rabbi, lived in Provence in the early 14th century. He only quotes Rabbi Akiva in his commentary on Bava Metzia, which seems to say that he agrees with Rabbi Akiva. But the more standard codes of Jewish law did not codify either Ben Petora or Rabbi Akiva. So we see here that this is really the horns of a moral dilemma, passage in Bava Metzia by itself, and it seems to contradict the passage in Sanhedrin, which we studied a moment ago. any questions or comments about the passage in Baba Metzia?
Is it okay to fight over the water?
Well, the passage seems to be assuming that everybody's very well behaved in the desert and nobody's going to kill each other over this canteen.
I watched too many Saudi Arabia movies from the
Right.
olden Lawrence of Arabia.
In the movies, it doesn't usually happen that way. Oh, you want to drink the water and I'll die? Fine. But the Ben Patar and Rabbi Akiva seem to think that both of these gentlemen are very well behaved, very minumas, perhaps they're British. And if one of them says, no, it's my canteen and I'm keeping it, the other one will say, fine, I understand. We follow Rabbi Akiva. So, you know, that's lots of times these discussions in the Talmud are sort of on an academic level. You don't feel that they're out there in the desert actually dealing with the problem. But the assumption here is that they're not going to fight to death over the canteen, that they're going to follow what the rabbis say.
So it's follow Rabbi Akiva.
What?
So it's follow Rabbi Akiva?
No, the Meiri says we follow Rabbi Akiva. The standard codes of Jewish law don't say anything. They didn't know what to do with this passage. They do not follow Ben Patora or Rabbi Akiva. They don't quote the subject.
Do you have a comment about it? Your personal comment?
No. We'll see by the time we get to the end of these 5 Talmudic passages that it's very hard to say anything general about this subject. There are a lot of different opinions, and it depends very much on the situation.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
The third passage we're going to learn in a moment, you will see how much it depends on the situation. Yes, Elisheva.
You mentioned that the question is whether the potential saver is in definite danger, will definitely die if it happens a certain way, or might.
Right.
But we didn't mention about the other person, whether the other person can or not be potentially saved. So in the case of the person in the water, you might be able to save that person. In the case of water only enough for one person at least is definitely going to die. And it seems to me that that would also change how you make decisions. If you can't possibly save the other life, doesn't it make sense to save your own?
Right. So that's exactly the point I was making. In other words, in the passage in Baba Metzia, according to the statistics or the outline of the passage, somebody is definitely going to die. The question is whether it's one person or two. In the first case, with the river and the robbers and the wild animal, it could be that no one will die. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, jumping forward, because we're not going to get to his responsum today, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef says that it's a mitzvah to donate a kidney because the chance of the donor dying is a very small percentage according to the doctors that he consulted. So it's only a safek sakana, it's only a doubtful danger, and therefore we should do what the passage in Sanhedrin says. On the other hand, if it's a case where there's a 90% chance that you will die, you should not do whatever it is that the situation is. So it really depends on the specific situation, and as we'll see in a moment, it also depends on the specific rabbi and the way he views that situation. So let us now move on to passage number 3.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
In the case of Rabbi Akiva, where he says your life comes first, how do you decide who's the one who comes first?
Well, I think he's referring to the person holding the canteen.
but wouldn't it make sense more that the person most likely to survive, regardless of whether they're holding the canteen, should be the one to take the thing? Because you could have somebody who's more sickly, more weak, or more dehydrated holding their canteen, but the other one would have a better chance if he had the canteen to actually get to safety, whereas the one who's holding the canteen.
That's a very interesting approach, but that approach is not presented in this passage. In other words, Rabbi Akiva says the person with the water should save themselves because it says v'chei achicha imach. He doesn't say the most likely person to survive should drink the water.
Question. Possession question. Possession is everything. If it's yours, if you want to give it up, fine. If you don't want to give it up, you don't have to. It's yours.
Yeah, well, that's what that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. The person with the water should save themselves because of the verse in Leviticus. Because our time is short, I want to continue with passage number 3. You'll notice that there is no English translation here. There is an English translation of the Talmud Yerushalmi, but it's not very good, to put it mildly, nor do I have a copy. So we're going to deal with the Aramaic original. The reason the English translation of the Talmud Yerushalmi is not any good is because there are many passages in the Talmud Yerushalmi that we simply don't understand. And you can translate whatever you want. After you've translated it, it still doesn't make any sense. And we will see here a number of sections in this passage which are very difficult to understand, even though it's a relatively short passage. And this passage from the Yerushalmi is crucial to the history of the halacha on this topic, because many of the medieval rabbis began to quote this passage from the Yerushalmi and to base their halachic decision on this particular passage. Because what's fascinating about this passage, there are 2 stories here. I'll make it a little bit bigger on the screen. I don't know if it affects you. What's fascinating about this passage is that within the 2 stories, you have various Talmudic rabbis with the opposite opinion. So here's story number 1. Rav Isi Itzid B'Safsufa. A rabbi named Rabbi Isi. There are a number of rabbis with that name, but according to the context here, he's a 1st or 2nd generation Amorah in the land of Israel, which means he lived around the year 220 or 250 of the Common Era. He was captured in Safsufa. Safsufa is a place in the Galilee, which is not far from Gush Chalav, for those of you who know where that is. And apparently this was a place inhabited by robbers. It was a very dangerous area in the land of Israel in the middle of the 3rd century. So here we have 2 rabbis reacting to the fact that Rav Isi was taken captive. Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Yicharech or Yichroch Hamet Bistino. Rabbi Yonatan says they should wrap the dead in his shrouds, in his sheet. In other words, in colloquial English would say, Rav Isi is a goner. He's a dead man walking. There is no way in the world he is going to survive. Prepare the tachrichim, prepare the shrouds. He's a dead man. In other words, there's nothing that can be done. We do not need to save him. We cannot save him. He's dead. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish has a totally different reaction. I'm a Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. De ana katel va-ana mitketel, ana ezel u'mishizev le b'chayla. He says, either I will kill or I will be killed. I am going to go and save him by force or with soldiers. What does he do? And I'll say more about Reish Lakish in a minute. Azalu faisun v'yavune le. He went and spoke to the robbers, to the ones who had kidnapped Rabbi Isi. Faisun, he calmed them down, he convinced them. V'yavune le, and they gave him Rabbi Isi. In other words, he sets out with a rescue party, doesn't say how many people. He goes to the brigands, he goes to the robbers, he talks to them. I don't know if he talks to them just talking or also with weapons. He talks to them, he convinces them to release Rabbi Isi. So we see here, but what's very important is what Reish Lakish said. Rabbi Shimon Lakish is Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said, either I will kill or I will be killed. In other words, he is willing to risk his life in order to save Rabbi Isi from the robbers. In other words, he seems to agree with the passage in Sanhedrin. Your friend is captured by robbers, go jump in and save him, even if it entails danger to your life. Whereas Rabbi Yonatan says no. Rabbi Yonatan says, this guy's a dead man, prepare the shrouds, he's a goner, forget about it, there's nothing we can do. Now, some people say the reason that Reish Lakish said what he said Does anybody know what Reish Lakish did before he became a rabbi?
He was a gladiator.
A robber.
Right. According to a passage in the Babylonian Talmud, he was a gladiator. From an historical point of view, that's doubtful. It only appears in the Babylonian Talmud. It doesn't appear in any of the sources from Eretz Israel. But certainly in the eyes of the poskim, of the medieval halachic authorities, Reish Lakish was a biryon. Reish Lakish was a really tough guy. He used to be a gladiator. And if he says either I'll kill or be killed, it's because he knew that he could deliver the goods. He could go out there and recapture Rabbi Isi. But I'm going to put that aside because I don't think Reish Lakish was a gladiator. I think that we have here one rabbi who's a realist who says Safsufa is the most dangerous place in the world. It's like Medellin, Colombia in the 1970s. Anybody who goes there to rescue Rabbi Isi is a dead man. Forget about it. And Reish Lakish says, no, I'm going to either kill or be killed. I'm going to rescue Rabbi Isi. So we see here within the same story, within the same Talmudic passage, we have one rabbi who says you do not risk your life to save your friend from robbers, and another one who says you do risk your life to save your friend from robbers. So if you didn't think there was enough of a juxtaposition between Bava Metzia and Sanhedrin because they weren't talking about the same case, in this passage in the Yerushalmi, they obviously are talking about the same case. And Rabbi Yonatan says, do not rescue. And Reish Lakish says, do rescue, even if it means that you will die. So we see here within the same Talmudic passage, two rabbis reacting in a very different way to the exact same moral dilemma. And the next story, which I won't read to you, but the next story is a similar story about a rabbi who was captured by a group of robbers in Safsufa. Two rabbis go to rescue him. There's a dialogue, a very interesting dialogue, half of which is unintelligible. But the bottom line is they do succeed in rescuing Zeir ben Bar Chinana from the robbers of Safsufa. So, if you like to do halachic arithmetic, which I don't, well, you'll say here, well, three rabbis said you do rescue, and one rabbi says you don't rescue, so 3 against 1, we follow the 3. But that's not the way halakha works. But we see here within these two stories, you have one opinion of Rabbi Yonatan that you do not rescue, it's too dangerous. The other opinion of Reish Lakish, Rabbi Imi, and Rabbi Shmuel, that you do rescue, you do try to rescue the person from Safsufa, even though it is very, very dangerous. Questions or comments about the Yerushalmi? Okay, and I think what's interesting about the Yerushalmi, as opposed to the first two passages, is it's not talking about a theoretical case. Right? This is halakha ma'aseh. This is ma'aseh shahaya. This is an actual case which occurred. And we have a halachic principle, which is ma'aseh rav, which means an actual case takes precedence. In other words, if you have to decide a halachic issue, you follow what rabbis actually did. So if you want to follow Maaseh Rav, follow what the rabbis actually did, you'll say these 3 rabbis actually went to Safsufa and endangered their lives to save Rabbi Ploni. And therefore, we will follow these 3 rabbis and also the passage in Sanhedrin and not perhaps some other theoretical passage in the Talmud.
It sounds like the rabbi who said not to go to Safsufa in the case of
Rabbi Yonatan, right? Mm-hmm.
Right. He was setting down a halacha. Reish Lakish felt that he was willing to do different. It doesn't say that you are not allowed to risk your life to save your friend. It just says that you don't have to.
You're saying in terms of Rabbi Yonatan?
In terms of Rabbi Yonatan, he says, don't do it. But Reish Lakish decides that he has the capability of going in and saving.
Right. But there are two things I want to react to that. Number one is neither of them is stating a halacha. This is not a halachic terminology. They're simply reacting to the situation. Rabbi Yonatan says we do not rescue. Reish Lakish says we do. And the other point is what you just said, and what I said about 10 minutes ago. It depends very much upon the specific situation, and it depends about how the person, the potential rescuer, views that situation. Rabbi Yonatan thinks there is no way that anybody can save Rabbi Isi. And Reish Lakish says,
I can.
Rabbi
I
Isi.
can. He says, I can.
Right, I can do it. Right, which I think is why throughout Jewish history there were so many opinions on this topic, because there is not a correct answer to this question. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the amount of danger of the person who's in harm's way, and on the abilities and the ha'aracha, the evaluation of the rescuer as to what the situation is and what are the chances of rescuing the other person.
Absolutely.
I would like to move to the fourth source because I still want to get to at least summarize a few of the responsa. So I'm going to share the screen one last time here. Okay. This is a passage from the Tractate of Nida. And if you'll ask, why is this story found in the Tractate of Nida, which deals with the laws of Nida? Well, that's the Talmud. You'll see in a moment, this story has nothing to do with the laws of Nida. This is a story from Nida Folio 61a about Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon, very famous rabbi, contemporary of Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petora, third generation Tanah, early 2nd century, before the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and that may be relevant, very relevant to the story here. So in the line before I put the brackets, I'm going to start a little bit earlier than the bracket. And in the English, I started with that line. Amar Rava, Hai lishna bishna afapi de lekabole la mibaye mechash le mibaye. Rava says, a famous Babylonian Amorah, 4th generation, Lishna bishna is a wonderful way to say Lashon Hara in Aramaic, right? Slander, even though we don't have to accept it in a court of law or in a legal situation, mechash la mibaye, we have to pay attention to it. We have to heed it. We have to take it into consideration. So if you hear a rumor, an unsubstantiated rumor about something, you don't have to rule halachically about it, but you have to take it into consideration. And then they bring the following story. Hanu b'nei Galila, certain Galileans, d'nafak alayu kala de katol nafsha. A rumor went out that these Galileans had killed someone. Atil kamei to Rabbi Tarfon. They come before Rabbi Tarfon, one of the most famous rabbis at that time. Amarule, they said to him, litmerinan mar. They said to him, hide us. As they come to this famous rabbi, they're being sought after, they're wanted for murder. They say, hide us. Amar laho, hechi neved. He said to them, what shall I do? Ila atmerinchu, if I don't hide you, chazu yataichu. Those who are running after you will find you. Atmerinchu, but if I hide you, ha'amura banan, the rabbi said, and now he quotes the passage we had from Rava before, that Lashon Hara, even though we don't accept it in a court of law, we still have to take it into consideration. In other words, if I hide you, it means I'm ignoring the fact that there is a rumor that you killed someone. So what does he say to them to do in the end? Zilu atun temaru nafshaychu. He says to them, go and hide yourselves. In other words, he doesn't hand them over to the authorities, but he is not willing to hide them because of the lishna bishna, because of the rumor about what they did, about the fact that they are murderers. And he says, go and hide yourselves. Now, what is the situation here? Remember, this is Rabbi Tarfon. These are robbers these are Jews in the Galilee at the beginning of the 2nd century. My assumption is that this has something to do with the struggle of the Jews against the Romans. And you'll hear in a minute that at least one commentator thinks that it does. In other words, apparently these Jews had killed someone connected to the Roman authorities. They go to Rabbi Tarfon, they say, hide me, and he says, on the one hand, I don't want you to die. On the other hand, there's a rumor that you killed someone. Go and hide yourselves. Tosafot here on the page, which I did not Xerox for you, Tosafot say that the reason I am not going to hide you is perhaps you killed someone, and if I hide you, the Roman authorities will kill me. In other words, this is a situation, according to Tosafot, similar to some of the other situations we have seen, that Rabbi Tarfon thinks, I'm going to take the screen off now. Rabbi Tarfon thinks that if he saves these Jews and hides them, he is putting his own life in danger. The Roman authorities will then come after him. As you know, throughout history, you hide a fugitive from justice, what happens? The police come after you. This has happened innumerable times in history. It happened innumerable times during the Shoah. In other words, the situation is where these Jews are being sought after by the Roman authorities, and Rabbi Tarfon decides not to hide them. In other words, he does not think, according to Tosafot, that he must endanger his life in order to save the lives of these other Jews. So to summarize these Talmudic passages, on the one hand, we have Sanhedrin, the passage in Sanhedrin that says, jump in the water, run after the lion, save your friend. We have Baba Metzia, where there is no clear conclusion, but following the usual principle that we follow Rabbi Akiva says, no, you must first save your own life. Your life takes precedent over your friend. We have the story in the Yerushalmi where Rabbi Yonatan says, do not endanger your life. And Reish Lakish, Rabbi Imi, and Shmuel say, do endanger your life and go and rescue your friend from Safsufa. And finally, we have Rabbi Tarfon in the Tractate of Nida, who, according to Tosafot, is not willing to hide these Jews because he knows that then the Romans will come after him and he may very well die. And finally, the fifth passage, which we did not have time to study, about Rav Ashi, where he says, you should endanger your life to save your friend. So to put it very simply in English, the opinions here are yes, no, yes and no, no and yes. If we summarize the 5 Talmudic passages on the page that was in front of us. So we see that beginning from the time of the Talmud and on down through halachic history, you had conflicting opinions on this subject. And I would like to conclude by telling you what a few of the major codes of Jewish law had to say on the subject. We'll start with Rabbi Yosef Karo. I've skipped a number of quite a few centuries. We're now in the 16th century in Safed, in Sfat. And Rabbi Yosef Karo quotes the passage from the Yerushalmi, the one about Safsufa. He quotes it in 2 places. In his commentary to the Rambam, Laws of Murder, chapter 1, halacha 14, which I read you aloud before, and in his commentary to the Tur, Choshen Mishpat, paragraph 426. And in both of those passages, Rabbi Yosef Karo says that we follow the Yerushalmi, that you should put yourself in safek sakana, in doubtful danger, in order to save your friend from sakana, from a real danger. In other words, he says we follow Reish Lakish and the other 2 rabbis and not Rabbi Yonatan, and you should endanger your life to a certain extent, safek sakana, in order to save your life from vadai sakana, from a definite danger. However, what's so interesting about this double Rabbi Yosef Karo? What's interesting is that he doesn't say it in the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch, as you know, was what he did at the end of his life, after writing the commentary on the Rambam and the commentary on the Tur. At the end of his life, in his old age, he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. And there he doesn't say a word about this subject. So it might mean that he has changed his mind. So the Sma, Rabbi Yoshua Falk, a famous commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, Choshen Mishpat, paragraph 426, he says that Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the authors of the Shulchan Aruch, do not quote the passage from the Yerushalmi. And from this we can learn, along with the fact that the Rif and the Rambam and the Rosh and the Tur do not quote the passage from the Yerushalmi, that nobody accepts this story as halachically binding. In other words, that we do not follow the dugma, the example of Reish Lakish. It could be that Reish Lakish was a very brave man and was willing to do what he did, but we do not codify this in Jewish law. It's not found in the Shulchan Aruch or the Rambam, the Rif, the Rosh, or the Tur, and therefore the Yerushalmi passage is not codified in Jewish law. So says Rabbi Yeshua Falk in the 17th century. And then skipping forward to two very famous poskim at the end of the 19th century, there's the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Berurah, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein and Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen. Rabbi Epstein died in 1908. Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen died in 1939. And these are two very famous codes of Jewish law from the early 20th century. And they both say yes and no. And I think that's a good summary of our subject. The Aruch HaShulchan says that some of the poskim quote the Yerushalmi passage and say that you should endanger your lives, but other Rishonim do not include the Yerushalmi passage, and they follow the passage in Nida about Rabbi Tarfon, that you do not endanger your lives to save those Jews who want to hide. And then what does Rabbi Epstein say? Hakol lefi ha'inyan. Everything is according to the situation. V'yesh lishkol ha'inyan bapeles. And the matter must be weighed in the scale. V'lo lishmor et atzmo yoter midai. And not guard yourself too assiduously. In other words, it's situational ethics. It depends very much on the situation, but you shouldn't be overly cautious. You have the passage in Nida in the Babylonian Talmud where Rabbi Tarfon says, do not endanger your life. You have the passage in the Yerushalmi where Reish Lakish says, you do endanger your life. I'm not going to decide. Hakol lefi ha'inyan. Everything is according to the particular situation. And there's a very similar sentence in the Mishnah Berurah, Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen, in the late 19th century. And I think that is a very good summary. But just to loop back to the topic I discussed in my introduction, to the topic of the kidney transplant, as I said, you have famous Orthodox poskim who say that it's a mitzvah to give a kidney because they only consider it a safek sakana, a doubtful danger to the donor. There are those who say that it's forbidden to donate a kidney because the danger is too great. And there are those who say that you are not required to donate a kidney, but it's a midat chasidut. It is an act of piety to do so. So if you expected a simple answer to my question at the beginning of this shiur, I am sorry to disappoint you. But what I wanted to show you from this shiur is A, that there is nothing new under the sun. Matters of life and death and saving lives have been debated by the rabbis for at least 2,000 years. And B, there are no simple answers to matters of life and death. It depends on the situation. It depends on the condition of the person being saved. And it depends on the abilities of the person doing the saving. And I hope that we can carry these dilemmas with us as we continue to deal with our current pandemic, as well as many other ethical issues in life. I believe that I am supposed to stop now. If any of you want to stay on during your break and ask me further questions, b'vakasha, I'm not going anywhere. But the rest of you should get out and go to your next class. Toda rabba and Shabbat Shalom.
I would like to make a comment.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Sure, Arlene. Sure.
You mentioned Barbara Wax.
Right.
You should know she was a very good swimmer. She had a passed a life-saving course. So when she went into the Don, she surely felt she could save him.
Right.
Unfortunately, the water pulled her under ground, and she got caught in the roots of some trees and therefore died.
Right,
So it's right in to all your questions. There's no answer.
Right, and Arlene, what happened to the little boy that she was trying to save?
He was fine. He came out fine, and unfortunately, he didn't say that anyone saved him. He just, she pushed him up to some fishing boat that pulled him in, or a boat, and that saved him. He was fine in the end.
Wow.
That's a story.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yes, Francis.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. I wonder if the rabbis have left place for the person who doesn't save to be able to live with him or herself afterwards. And that's something that wasn't addressed maybe in all these yes and maybe in yes. So that's one question. The other one, I think I've forgotten, but if you could respond to that, perhaps I'll remember.
Well, you know, Rabbi Akiva would say, your brother should live with you. Your first obligation is to save yourself. You know, if you're dead, you can't save your brother or anyone else. So I don't think, you know, Rabbi Akiva would say that, you know, you might have guilt, but ultimately, according to this verse, you first have to save yourself. Obviously, these passages don't deal with the guilt involved.
Yeah.
Because the question is not the guilt. The question is, what do you do? And frequently you have 30 seconds or a minute to decide. So I don't think that the guilt is dealt with, at least not directly in these passages.
Okay.
I have a question.
Thank you.
Do
Yes, who's
rabbis
asking?
today make it a mitzvah to donate blood?
To donate blood?
Is that considered a mitzvah by
Yes,
modern
donating
rabbis?
donating blood is a mitzvah because
So there's a
it does not endanger the person who's donating the blood unless they have some sort of very rare condition, and it definitely
so it
helps
should be
save-
encouraged, I would
Right,
think.
absolutely. It's a form of Pikuah Nefesh. It's helping save lives, and that's why many Jewish organizations encourage people to donate blood.
Rabbi Golinkin, can you hear me?
Yes, who's talking?
Hadassah from Netanya.
Yes, Hadassah.
Several years ago at the Mediscope, that's the day that Hadassah women go to Jerusalem, go to the Hadassah hospital, and we hear lectures from the finest doctors and staff of the hospital. And there was a doctor who spoke about transplants, and she said that although the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, are against giving parts of the body of somebody who is almost dead, they are the donors of live transplants, mostly kidneys. They are the largest group, the ultra-Orthodox, to do that.
Okay, well that's very interesting. I would love to see statistics on that. As I said, among the Orthodox poskim, you have these three camps of halachic authorities. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef highly recommends, says it's a mitzvah to donate a kidney, whereas the Minchat Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, says it's forbidden. Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg says it's forbidden. So you really have this wide range of opinions among famous Orthodox poskim. It could be that over the years, the donors became more convinced that it was less dangerous as the procedure became more common.
Yes.
And if the level of danger goes down, then the safek sakana, the doubtful danger, decreases, which is of course more reason for a person to donate a kidney.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question?
Yes, one last question, and then I have to get off because I have to get on to my next class.
Okay,
Ken.
I was wondering if there's a parallel about the fact that Judaism puts the preference to save the mother as opposed to the fetus. Does that come in at all involved in this?
The subject of abortion has been discussed in Judaism since the time of the Mishnah.
No, not abortion, but if you have to choose between saving the mother or saving the baby.
Right, but that's the first case mentioned in the Mishnah. It says if the infant is stuck in the mother's womb, and do you save the mother or the infant? So it says until the head or the majority of, there are two versions of the Mishnah, until the head or the majority of the infant comes out, the mother takes precedence. Once the head or the majority of the infant comes out, they are both viable human beings, and you cannot save one and harm the other. In other words, you have to try and save both. But as long as the infant is still inside the mother, it is not yet a nefesh, it is not yet a soul, and therefore you save the mother and not the baby.
What
And
we
this
spoke about is very different.
Right, but that's why I said it had to do with abortion, because in the classic Jewish law, a fetus is not a human being, which is very different than the Catholic approach, which says that a fetus has the exact same status as a human being, which is why if you do an abortion, you're committing murder. Judaism is opposed to abortion for many reasons, but it does not consider abortion murder, because in Judaism, life begins at birth and not at conception. So I'm sorry I have to stop now, but I wish you all Shabbat Shalom and enjoy the rest of your study day.
It was very interesting.
Class.
Toda rabba.
Toda.
Thank you. Thank you.
תודה רבה, שבת שלום.